Welcome back to Women's Wealth, The Middle Way, the show that answers your questions about work, money, and family. My name is Susan McGlory Michael, and I am the CEO and founder of Glen Eagle, a wealth management firm in New Jersey. Our guest today is Megan Gluth, owner and CEO of Catalynt Solutions Incorporated, and this is a leading chemical service provider. Megan went from attorney to business owner and believes that no matter where you are in life, it's always the right time to take the first step forward. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
The reason we asked you to join us today is your story, I think, is very unique, and I think it's often, for many of us as women, we're puzzled and say, how do we make a transition, or how do we do this, and what inclines us to do this, and is this too scary to do? And so I'd love you to begin today just to talk to our fellow listeners about your company and how you went from an attorney to a CEO.
So it's kind of an interesting story. This company was founded in 1994 by its original founder soon after he left the United States Military Academy at West Point and his subsequent military service. He also played professional rugby, and as a result of sort of the confluence of all those factors, developed a lot of relationships with people from all over the world and saw a real opportunity in the chemical, industrial, raw material, and ingredient space for the global interplay of manufacturers and users. And so in the early 90s, he started this company basically as an import and export company, bringing those very same materials and commodities into the United States or exporting them out. And he started this company from his house. Fast forward to 2011. When I come on scene, I had been practicing law in both Minnesota and Oregon and was making a move to Seattle, Washington to be closer to family. And it's sort of just an interesting series of events, and I think this is indicative of the life lesson, the first life lesson that comes here is always be in a position of openness and welcoming the opportunities that are in front of you. I was interviewing at law firms in Seattle, and I asked a friend of mine from law school if they knew anybody in Seattle who could tell me about the nature of these firms. And he said, no, but I know this guy who runs a chemical company out there. You should speak to him because he's well connected and he probably knows some of these people and could tell you something. And so I sat down with this gentleman, and he happened to be the owner of this chemical company, and we hit it off right away. He and I think, made sense to each other in so many ways, and began a dialogue back and forth about the various legal matters of the day and things affecting his business. I had been advising small businesses prior to this, and so we had a lot to talk about. And soon after that coffee, he sent me a message and he said, I'd like to offer you a job to be the general counsel of my company. And for reasons that I didn't understand then, that certainly had no logical indication, I said yes. And in 2011, I became the company's first general counsel. And so immediately I began learning the business and studying the business. And obviously when you're a lawyer and a general counsel at that, there's this wonderfully unique position to be able to see so many facets of the business and really every single facet of a business. And I began to love what we were doing and what was going on. And I was excited, and every day was different. I was learning so much about international business, international trade, and American manufacturing and American industrial production, and then all of the other components that ride alongside that. And so a few years after I started, I became the company's president, and then I became the company's CEO. And I'm obviously advancing and rushing the timeline here. But in 2019, the company's owner and I had a conversation about business succession. He was looking at a retirement exit at some point soon, and I was just madly in love with the business and enjoying myself. And I said to him, if I can figure out the financing, would you let me buy this business? And he agreed. And again, that's a separate conversation for a separate podcast, how we put all that together. But in 2019, I acquired 55% of the company. And our plan was for him to work and stay owner for as long as felt right to him. I mean, certainly he had born this company and I didn't rush him out. We wanted him to work for as long as he wanted to work. And we thought maybe we would work under that arrangement for some time. But ultimately, about a year later, he decided to retire. And so in 2020, I acquired the remaining shares and owned 100% of the business. When I acquired the company, we were doing just shy of $50 million a year in revenue. And right now we do anywhere between $100 to $120 million a year in revenue. In the space of 5 years, we've doubled the size of this company. I'm very proud of my team and the work we do here, but there's obviously so much that goes into that.
And when you talk about it, strong companies start with strong foundations. And actually, West Point is very near and dear to my entire family. My late husband was actually a West Point graduate. And I know with Duty Honor Country, whenever they're interviewing someone, and it says a lot for you as a person, because the one thing that every West Pointer looks for, especially when they have a company that they've built and is their brainchild, is honesty, openness, and integrity. And when a West Pointer highly respects someone, that says a lot. When you were talking, I had no idea till this conversation that there was a West Point connection there, but I do think the gift you were given was a very strong foundation of a company born with a lot of integrity. And the gift that he gave you was that he really respected what you were going to bring to the table so that you could grow it from 50 million to 120, but in the right way. And I know you've spoken a lot about leadership, and of course that's where your founder right leadership comes from. But that requires a lot of strength and also vulnerability. And how do you balance those two as a role of a CEO?
I think anybody listening who is a CEO or a business owner knows. My former business partner and the founder of this business told me, he said, you'll breathe rare air, and it will be air that not a lot of people in the world breathe, and you won't understand it. And he was right. I had advised businesses for the entirety of my career up to that point, and I've been very, very close, shotgun seat, to a lot of business owners. But I didn't understand it until it was me, until I had that weight. And so we have choices as leaders about what we do with that weight, what we do with that stress, is to be honest about it. And that's, I think, where the inherent vulnerability comes in, the struggles you're facing and the true weight of the challenge. And also to be honest about how that excites you and how that energizes you and how that is fuel for you in a way that it isn't for maybe a lot of the population. I think there's some of us that are just a little bit crazy for wanting to have this entrepreneurial bent in our lives. But that vulnerability and that truth about where we stand and how things are has to be balanced and has to be sort of counter-tipped by a very decisive and pragmatic and steadfast energy as well. And so I try to do all things. I try to say, this is what is, and this is my position in that, and this is my feeling about that. If I can be so bold as to say that part of vulnerability is to say, this moment sucks in this business, or this moment I'm elated. But also then to say, but this is what we're going to do. And regardless of any of the other things, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it.
And it's so interesting when you talk about leadership and integrity and vulnerability and being willing to say, this isn't going well. My husband and I used to always smile when someone would say to us, well, to be perfectly honest, we would always look at each other and kind of pause and think. We assumed when we entered the room that you were going to be honest. We didn't assume that there would be any other way. And I think you're right. I think that's why you probably have been so successful. But in your journey, I know you talked about, just touched on, you have to be willing to say, that this isn't going well. How in this journey has your failure or adversity served as kind of a catalyst for this growth when you were able to take this company from 50 million to 120?
I think the way I could answer that question would be just to articulate it a little bit differently, at least the way we are willing to talk about the way we lead. So much of what I do is really born from intuition and born from this intuitive sense of what's in front of me as a potential opportunity. And sometimes, if I'm honest, that doesn't make sense to everyone else in the room, right? Because when we're in our own intuition and we're in our own observation of a situation that's kind of informed by things that can't be laid out on paper, that can't be articulated in an Excel spreadsheet, we do have to kind of go it alone a little bit. And that is a very, very vulnerable thing to do. To listen to that, to lean into that, and to push everybody forward into that with you at potentially great risk to yourself.
I totally agree. And I think you're right with women intuition, because I don't think I've ever regretted a decision I made from the heart versus what the statistics or what others think. And I do think that as women CEOs and leaders in any industry, that is one of the greatest gifts we bring. And when we're talking to other women today, we always end our podcast. So this would be my last question to you is, what advice would you give women listening today who are hesitant to take on that business risk? I think that sometimes the one negative of we as women is we sometimes talk ourselves out of it. I have to see people coming in that say, oh, my business is worth X amount of dollars. And a lot of the male will say, that's not enough. We're worth twice as much as that. And the women say, really? We're worth that much? And I think that that's one of the negatives of women. We want it to be perfect. So what advice would you give women who are saying, you know what? I know I've done this for a while, but I really want to be an entrepreneur. I really feel like I could change the world or take that business risk. What maybe something that they should be looking at or thinking through?
I think every woman who feels that way has to remember that you wouldn't feel that way if it wasn't for you. None of us are given an appetite for growth or risk or more if we don't have along with it the attendant possibility to realize that. And sometimes we just have to remember that. Again, it's back to this concept of intuition. We have to say, I know that the reason I want this is because this is for me. And I don't exactly know maybe in this moment how I'm going to get there, but I trust that I've already been this far. And if I'm dreaming of going further, then I trust that the answers I have for getting there also reside within me. Most women, to your point, have a stronger heft as individuals and a stronger heft as businesses than we realize, which is exactly what you said. We don't always know just how strong we are. And so sometimes it's a matter of just saying, hey, if I'm dreaming this big and I have a vision for something this big, then I must have the heft to accomplish it. And we have to give ourselves that kind of pep talk, because if you really think about it, none of us has any guarantees in any day for business that anything we're doing is going to work, no matter what. So why not leverage your own strength and your own heft on growth? Because even staying the same isn't guaranteed.
I can't thank you enough for that, because there's not one thing I could add that would be more powerful than what you just said. I totally agree with you. And I think the only gift we can give is not only to force ourselves to be that person, but then to encourage women that are younger than us to continue and role model for them. So, Meg, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. You have been an inspiration, and all of us wish you the best of luck in growing this firm and taking it on for the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Women's Wealth, The Middle Way. Make sure to subscribe to us and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast app. Join us for new episodes every other Wednesday. See you in 2 weeks.